Hello there guys, how are you today, and welcome to my review of the 2017 Formula 1 season. Yes, it has finished. The Abu Dhabi Grand Prix took place earlier today, and I would say the 2017 season in general has been the best of the V6 era, one of the best seasons in recent times. So let's review it. So the year 2017 started with one big question on everybody's lips: who will replace world champion Nico Rosberg at Mercedes? Because of course, after winning the 2016 World Championship, Nico Rosberg shocked the world and retired. He quit, which meant somebody had to go into that seat to be Lewis Hamilton's new teammate. And there were lots of names being thrown around. Fernando Alonso was mentioned, Pascal Wehrlein was obviously one of the favourites. Even Max Verstappen and Daniel Ricciardo were talked about quite a bit. But it ended up being Valtteri Bottas, who of course had been at Williams in 2013 and done a decent job there, got a few podiums, some consistent races, etc. And he got in to the Mercedes team. Not bad. And then we went to testing, and of course there were so many changes to the cars this year. For example, the tyres got much bigger in width, which affects the grip, and essentially the cars had much more downforce this season in comparison to the last few seasons. And everyone was wondering whether Mercedes would still dominate the season. And the other question was, of course, how would McLaren and Honda do? Would they make improvements? But it came clear in testing in February that wasn't to be. But it did look like Ferrari had made gains, and the midfield was pretty similar, maybe Renault making a couple of gains, and Force India and Williams was still pretty strong. And then we got to Australia. So before I carry on talking, I'm going to say who competed in this year's World Championship. So, for Mercedes, we had Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. At Ferrari, we had Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Räikkönen. At Red Bull, we had Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen. Force India, we had Sergio Perez and Esteban Ocon. At Williams, we had Felipe Massa, who came back this year despite retiring at the end of 2016, and rookie driver Lance Stroll. At Renault, we had, at the start of the season, Nico Hülkenberg and Jolyon Palmer. Toro Rosso, we had Daniel Kvyat and Carlos Sainz. At Haas, we had Romain Grosjean and, of course, Kevin Magnussen. At McLaren, you had Fernando Alonso and Stoffel Vandoorne. And at Sauber, you had Marcus Ericsson and Pascal Wehrlein. And that was who we had going into the first race. But that's not quite true, because in the first couple of the races, Pascal Wehrlein for Sauber wasn't able to race as a result of an injury sustained at the Race of Champions over the winter. And that meant Antonio Giovinazzi had a chance in F1, a big chance. The Italian driver, he got to drive for Sauber for a couple of races. And there you go. And that happened. So let's talk about the Australian Grand Prix. So as we arrived in Australia, Lewis Hamilton took pole position for that race, showing Mercedes was still pretty dominant. Daniel Ricciardo broke down on the parade lap, and then at his home race, but managed to get going again on lap 3, obviously a couple of laps down, and then on lap 28 again, the car broke down. So yeah, it looked like his home race wasn't going to go well, and there'd be more questions about Red Bull reliability, which throughout their time in F1 has always been popping up, whatever the season. Even in the dominant seasons, they had quite a few reliability issues. In other news, Kevin Magnussen and Marcus Ericsson had a crash on lap 1. I think this was a start of what was going to be a familiar story for Kevin Magnussen. Lots of crashes and debates around the drivers over the year, and this was certainly the first of many. Vettel jumped Hamilton during the pit stops, as Hamilton got stuck behind Max Verstappen, so it looked like Mercedes would have, again, a year of issues in dirty hair when driving behind the car. They don't have the clear red, it's dirty air, and they can't overtake the guy ahead, and that gave Vettel an advantage, and he went on to win that race. In the midfield, there was good battles between drivers like Alonso, Ocon and Hülkenberg, showing overtaking can be done, but obviously it wasn't going to be so easy for the Mercedes this season, maybe as they're expecting to be dominating. And Alonso retired with a suspension failure. But again, it looked like Honda were lacking on power, which obviously is going to hurt McLaren. Moving on to the next race in China, the second of the flyaway races, Lewis Hamilton took pole position. He's often dominant at the Chinese Grand Prix. Lance Stroll crashed on lap 1. He had a tough time in Australia, and it looks like he's struggling in F1, although this crash was caused by a Force India and it wasn't particularly his fault. Antonio Giovinazzi, who of course as I said was replacing Pascal Wehrlein, crashed twice over this weekend, including in the race. Mercedes' new driver, Valtteri Bottas, spun on the safety car, so he was having a bit of a shaky start to the season, and there were wheel-to-wheel battles between the Ferraris and the Red Bulls. I would say Vettel's overtake on Ricciardo has a potential for overtake of the season. Of course, I want you to tell me in the comments, what is your favourite overtake of the season? Alonso retires again, Hamilton wins, and Verstappen amazingly comes third despite starting in 16th. He had a brilliant start and he was proving how good he is at overtaking. Moving on to Bahrain, the first night race of the season, Bottas probably shocked everyone and took pole position, and Hamilton second, but Vettel got past Hamilton at turn 1, which meant the order was Bottas, Vettel, Hamilton. Bottas was quite a slow leader in that race, he just didn't really have much pace. As Vettel did the undercut, Verstappen crashed because of brake failure, so a retirement for him. He had lots of these coming through the season. While Stroll was in another incident, this time with Carlos Sainz, who also had a bit of a shaky start to the season, I would suggest. The safety car, caused by all these things, helped Vettel, and while Hamilton was trying to pit on the safety car, he got a penalty for blocking Ricciardo because they double stacked for Bottas and he wanted to get a gap so he wouldn't be delayed behind Bottas in the pit lane, but he blocked Ricciardo on the pit exit and that gave a penalty. Hamilton was able to chase Sebastian Vettel, but because of the extra time of the penalty, it meant it was never really going to happen, and Sebastian Vettel won this year's Bahrain Grand Prix. We then went to the Russian Grand Prix, which of course is now towards the beginning of the season rather than towards the end where it had been in previous years. Fernando Alonso broke down on the formation lap, again showing more Honda power unit issues. Vettel took pole position for this Grand Prix, but Valtteri Bottas managed to jump him at the start of the race. Jolyon Palmer and Roman Grosjean had a crash. It wasn't the most consistent season 5 of his drivers, and this is a good example of that. Ricciardo had another retirement, this time the brakes failed, while Vettel tried the overcut to put pressure on Bottas, but he wasn't able to get past, and Bottas takes his first ever win. However, it was fair to say that at this race, Ferrari were faster than Mercedes, and Hamilton only came 4th, and it was strategy more than anything else that gave Bottas this victory. Then we came to Spain for the start of the proper European section of the season. Hamilton took pole position again, but Sebastian Vettel got ahead of him at the start. There was a collision at turn 1 between Valtteri Bottas, Kimi Räikkönen and Max Verstappen. You had Kimi and Verstappen out, and then you had the image of the crying Ferrari boy, which went all over the internet. I'm sure you'll remember it if you saw that race. And then after the pit stops, Bottas tried to block Vettel to help Hamilton catch up, but Vettel eventually gets past. Vettel and Hamilton go wheel to wheel after their pit stops, and Vettel pushes Hamilton off the track, but it was fair racing, the stewards team, so no complaints there. And other drivers to collide at turn 1 were Felipe Massa and Stoffel Vandoorne. They had a collision at turn 1. It looked like Vandoorne maybe wasn't quite on the pace at the start of the season for McLaren, but he is a rookie driver, so of course he has to be given time to get into the sport. Bottas retired with an engine failure. He was using an older engine in this race, and obviously the retirement didn't help his championship chances. And while Lewis Hamilton eventually managed to get past Sebastian Vettel in a fantastic overtake, and Ricciardo managed to get a podium for Red Bull despite Red Bull not having the best pace. In other news, Force India managed to get 4th and 5th, and Pascal Wehrlein came 8th for Sauber, scoring a few crucial points for the back of the grid team. And yes, this was probably the first race of the season where we had a wheel-to-wheel battle between Hamilton and Vettel. Very exciting. Now, moving on to the Monaco Grand Prix, the most glamorous circuit on the calendar, most glamorous race, that is for sure. However, the Mercedes team seems to struggle, particularly Hamilton, didn't get him into Q3. Jenson Button returned for one race, for McLaren, while Alonso was racing in the Indy 500, which by the way didn't go too well for him, because guess what? His McLaren Honda failed on him, and he was doing pretty well. Anyway, Kimi Räikkönen took pole for the Monte Carlo Grand Prix and was able to stay in the lead. However, Vettel jumped him in the pits. He seemed to get a better strategy. Some people would say this was possible team orders. Not so sure if this is true or not. Jenson Button on his one-off return causes a big crash with Pascal Wehrlein on the corner just before the tunnel at Monaco. So yeah, that was pretty bad. We had Pascal Wehrlein's car on its side, and the other Sauber of Marcus Ericsson managed to crash under the consequential safety car. Probably not his best moment in F1. Anyway, Vettel went on to win that race, and Hamilton finished that race in 7th after starting in P13, so not the best weekend for him. Then we went to Canada for there's always in the middle of the European season for some reason, not sure why. Hamilton got away well from pole. He always seemed to dominate at the circuit. Max Verstappen got a brilliant start to go into P2. That was one of the best starts of the season, I would argue. There was a big crash between Carlos Sainz, Roman Grosjean and Felipe Massa. You sort of had Sainz sort of just ended up being flying across the circuit near enough after trying to squeeze Grosjean. It all got a bit messy, and essentially Massa was taken out. Sainz was certainly at fault for this. Vettel had to pit because of front wing damage caused at turn 1 with Verstappen overtaking, and then Verstappen retired after the safety car because of an engine failure, another Renault issue. Vettel managed to fight back to P4 to get ahead of the battling Force India cars, who made contact and started a big rivalry there, and Fernando Alonso retired again. Hamilton wins the race, leading home a Mercedes 1-2. I believe that was the first Mercedes 1-2 of the 2017 season. Then we got to Baku, Azerbaijan. Now this was the best race of the season by far, at least in my opinion. So the Mercedes took a 1-2 in qualifying, Hamilton on pole, Bottas second, so they locked out the front row of the grid. Bottas and Raikkonen collided on the first lap. They've collided before in previous years, and they did it again. Bottas got a puncture, and I would say he was at fault for this. Verstappen retired yet again with more mechanical issues, and Vettel runs into and then hits Hamilton under safety car. He accused Hamilton of brake checking him, but the telemetry shows that wasn't the case. Vettel was just going too fast under the safety car. And Vettel got a bit annoyed and went to the side of Hamilton and sort of rammed into him. And of course that's pretty dangerous driving, and that really kicked off the rivalry between the two drivers, which before this race was pretty friendly, I would say. And anyway, Vettel got a penalty for this eventually, but this was sort of cancelled out because Hamilton's headrest came loose. Nothing to do with the incident, just happened to happen. And in the end, Vettel did manage to get ahead of Hamilton. In other news, the Force Indias of Sergio Perez and Esteban Ocon crashed into each other yet again. This is becoming every race now. They seem to be crashing into each other. And yeah, Daniel Ricciardo managed to win despite having to pit very early. Bottas got second despite having the puncture at lap 1. And a rookie driver who had been struggling so far this season, Lance Stroll, came third. Brilliant performance by the young Canadian driver. Can't complain, and I would say that was a crazy race. Now we came back to Europe proper, and the Austrian Grand Prix. Bottas took pole position, gets a great start. I think some people thought he jumped the start, but no, he didn't. It was just a fantastic start. End of. Verstappen and Alonso both retired towards the start of the race. Various issues. And then it was a very close ending for this race. It wasn't the best race, but it was a close ending with Bottas just beating Vettel and Ricciardo just beating Hamilton for third place, and then Hamilton finished fourth because he had a gearbox penalty in qualifying, which meant he only started in P9. In other news, Roman Grosjean in this race came sixth for Haas to score some very important points for the American team. Then we got to Silverstone. Of course, Lewis Hamilton's home race, and he was on pole position. And then on lap 1, there was a crash between the Toro Rosso cars, while Hamilton managed to get away from the field pretty well. And then there was drama behind Hamilton as the Ferraris get late punctures, meaning they were in the low end of the points. Raikkonen did somehow get back to third, but Vettel only came 7th, which essentially cancels out the big advantage you got in Monaco, where Hamilton only finished 7th. So this was a brilliant and crucial race for this year's World Championship, and it looked like that there was certainly a clear battle between Mercedes and Ferrari developing. And then we got to the final race before the summer break. It was going to be the Hungarian Grand Prix. Ferrari generally looked like the faster team this weekend and got a 1-2. It looked like Mercedes were struggling a bit, but Hamilton thought he could catch the Ferraris and asked to be allowed past his teammate Valtteri Bottas, but he was allowed, but he wasn't quite able to get past the Ferrari. So in the final corner, he let Bottas back through. It shows he is very honest, but there were lots of questions. What if he loses the World Championship by the 3 points he lost by finishing 4th instead of 3rd? What would that say about him? So yeah, Vettel wins the race from Räikkönen despite some handling issues, although it looked like Räikkönen was the fastest car but just wasn't allowed to race. More team orders potentially. The two Red Bulls crash into each other on lap 1, with Verstappen crashing into Ricciardo, which meant Ricciardo was out the race, and Alonso does brilliantly for McLaren Honda to come P6. In other news, Paul di Resta, who hadn't been in the sport since I believe 2013, races instead of the ill Felipe Massa in the Williams. Of course, di Resta has been working with Sky Sports, but he got the chance to drive Williams, and he did it right. Okay, he was quite slow, but you wouldn't expect him to be in the points on the comeback when he just got into the car at the start of qualifying. So overall, he can't complain, and maybe it'll be the next season, which although that hasn't been announced yet, and it could be Kubica. So then we had the summer break, and Vettel was ahead in the standings, and it was up to Hamilton to come back. And then we got to Belgium, and Hamilton got pole position at Spa, and he matched the all-time pole record in Formula 1, matching Michael Schumacher. Hamilton wins a tight race from Vettel, which was complicated by a safety car, and at the end Vettel was on faster tyres, but Hamilton was able to hold him off, especially in the wheel-to-wheel battle down the Kemmel Straight. This was a fantastic battle between the two drivers. Bottas only comes 5th, so it looks like he's still struggling a little bit. He hasn't been the most consistent driver in the races so far. The Force Indias come together yet again, giving serious problems for the Silverstone-based team. This was Hamilton's 200th Grand Prix, which he was able to win, and Daniel Ricciardo gets yet another podium. The F1 circus then arrived in Monza, Italy. Hamilton now has the pole record following a wet qualifying session, so he now has more pole positions than Michael Schumacher, and in fact anyone at all. And then the race ended with a Mercedes 1-2 on Ferrari home turf, obviously very embarrassing for Ferrari in front of their Tifosi fans. Lance Stroll did brilliantly in qualifying to start 2nd after the wet qualifying. Of course he fell back during the race, but it was still one of the standout performances from anyone over the season for him to start 2nd. And for a rookie driver to get 2nd place in the wet qualifying is very impressive. Verstappen got a puncture on lap 1 fighting Felipe Massa, and in general there were a lot of engine penalties over this weekend, putting the rules about engine penalties into question. You know, with Liberty Media now at the helm, there could be some changes. You can't tell. Any change can happen, you just have to wait and see. But yet, initially it was ridiculous. Although in a way, engine penalties does create exciting races. Yeah, so tell me in the comments on this video, what do you think of the idea of engine penalties? Do you think they're a good idea? Or do you think they should be completely scrapped, or should the rules be slightly altered? Tell me. And then we got to the Asian part of the season, Singapore. And this was meant to be a Ferrari circuit, because it's a bit similar to Russia or Monaco or Hungary. A bit tighter, where Mercedes have been struggling. And yes, Ferrari did brilliantly in qualifying, but both Ferraris and Verstappen collided at turn 1, gifting Hamilton the lead. And this was the first ever wet race at Singapore. It wasn't wet the whole time, but most of the race was wet. And Ricciardo was faster than Hamilton, but wasn't able to overtake, and Hamilton took the victory, this is a crucial moment in this year's World Championship, to be honest. And also Jolyon Palmer managed to finish 6th, with obviously lots of pressure and questions surrounding his future in Formula 1. We then got to Malaysia. There were lots of technical issues for Ferrari at the Malaysian Grand Prix, with Vettel being forced to start at the back due to engine issues in qualifying, and Hamilton started the front, but a few laps in, Verstappen was able to get ahead, and then he got away. Maybe Hamilton was thinking already more about the championship rather than racing the sometimes unpredictable Max Verstappen. And then at the end of the race, Vettel and Stroll collide on the slowdown lap. However, Vettel did manage to finish P4, but there were questions whether you'd have an engine penalty, or a gearbox penalty at the following race in Japan. But yeah, a collision on the slowdown lap sort of never happens, does it? And it did somehow between Vettel and Stroll. It was a bit of a strange one. And in other news, Pierre Gasly replaced the disgraced Daniel Kvyat, who has essentially been kicked out of the Toro Rosso team and the Red Bull program following so many poor performances. And yeah, Gasly, he's hoping to impress before next season. Then we got to Japan for the final part of the Asian bit of the season. Hamilton wins from pole, and Vettel retires with reliability issues, meaning it is really now advantage Hamilton in the World Championship. The Red Bulls also get onto the podium with Verstappen in second, Ricciardo third. Verstappen does nearly win this race, but it just isn't quite meant to be. Traffic means he's not able to get quite close enough to Hamilton. And Jolyon Palmer finishes in 12th on his final race with Renault, and possibly his final ever race in Formula 1. And then we get to USA Grand Prix. At the USA Grand Prix, Liberty Media sort of tried like an American style intro sequence. And I don't know, mixed reactions. I personally thought it was a bit stupid, but it was okay to watch, I guess. But I would certainly find it a bit tedious if they did it every single race. But tell me what you think about that in the comments, and what changes you want to see in the post-race and pre-race before 2018. Hamilton wins following a good battle. Sebastian Vettel made a great overtake, and Daniel Ricciardo yet again retired with mechanical issues. It really wasn't turning into Red Bull season, was it? Verstappen managed to get past Kimi Räikkönen on the final lap, but it seemed to have been off the circuit, and therefore he was demoted. And yeah, there was a lot of controversy about that because it was such a good overtake. Nobody wanted to see him penalised, I guess. So that was certainly controversial. And I'd like to know what you guys think about the idea of penalties for overtaking off track and how strict they should be about that. And then Hartley makes his debut for Toro Rosso, Brendon Hartley. He's a former driver in the Red Bull Junior Driver Program. And Gasly was at the Super Formula, which obviously gave Hartley his chance. And Sainz has now replaced Jolyon Palmer at the Renault team. And so now it looked like Brendon Hartley and Pierre Gasly would be doing the rest of the season for Toro Rosso. And then we got to Mexico. A close battle between Vettel, Verstappen and Hamilton in qualifying. However, at the start of the race there was a collision which left Hamilton and Vettel at the back. And then Verstappen was able to win this race because it essentially became pretty easy for him. But Hamilton wins the championship, finishing in P9 with Vettel only in P4. And fourth world championship is now equal with Vettel, of course. And the only other drivers to have this many is, of course, Schumacher. You had Prost as well, and Vettel, and a couple of other drivers, Fangio as well, of course, having won that many championships. And surely now Hamilton is amongst the top drivers ever to grace this sport. However, I would say he did have a pretty lackluster race. I think that's a fair comment. He didn't seem to be too aggressive battling. He did have a very good battle with McLaren's Fernando Alonso, and it was nice to see Alonso battling. And hopefully next year, now it's been announced that McLaren are going to be with Renault next season instead of Honda, and Honda's going to Toro Rosso for engine supply. Maybe we'll see more of Alonso versus Hamilton next season. So yeah, it was pretty exciting, and Hamilton won his fourth world title with 2 races to spare. And it looked like what happened in Asia, in Singapore, Malaysia and Japan, really hurt Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari. We then got to the Brazilian Grand Prix. Hamilton made a pretty uncharacteristic mistake in Q1 and he crashed out. Bottas manages to save the day for his team and get pole position. However, Vettel beats Bottas at the start and is able to win the race, although not by a big margin. And in general, we haven't seen many races this year where the race has been won by a big margin. I think that's a fair comment. I think that's really good for the sport to always have a battle for first place, at least somewhere close, to keep it exciting. Hamilton managed to fight back to P4 after some brilliant overtakes, showing he can still race. And he wasn't so far behind the race winner. It was pretty close, and there was certainly good racing throughout the field. And before this weekend, Brazilian favourite Felipe Massa announced his retirement from the sport, obviously before the Grand Prix, and he has a good race, but it was pretty emotional seeing him at his final Brazilian Grand Prix. And then we got to the final Grand Prix of the 2017 season, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Bottas took pole position from Hamilton. Ricciardo retired from the race with a hydraulics failure, while Sainz also retired after the wheel wasn't put on properly at the pit stop. Bottas did get away well from pole position, unlike in Brazil, and held off Hamilton, and he was able to win this race, holding off Hamilton, while Ferrari were quite a bit off the pace. Renault managed to get P6 despite a time P6 in the constructors, so obviously worth a lot of money, despite a time penalty for Hülkenberg, which was caused at the start of the race where he cut a chicane and gained an advantage. And of course, what happened to Sainz? And yeah, in other news, Alonso got P9 in their final race on McLaren Honda, and Massa gets a point in his final ever Formula 1 race. So yes guys, there you go, that is all the races reviewed. I want to know what is your favourite race of the season and what is the best overtake, and now I'm going to talk about every team and try to give a review of them. So let's start with the championship winners, Mercedes. I would say they were pretty dominant again this season. I think it was more that Ferrari caught up rather than Mercedes slowing down. Of course, they do seem to have issues on a couple of tracks, such as Monaco, Hungary and Singapore. Although they did manage to win in Singapore, but okay, they were lucky. And they were pretty dominant. I think they'll also be glad that Hamilton and Bottas, at least for now, seem to be getting along pretty well, which of course is good news for them, because you don't want your teammates arguing like they had in previous years with Hamilton and Rosberg. And ultimately, Ferrari only won a few races this season. They didn't win. Ferrari won in Australia, they won in Bahrain, they won Monaco, they won Hungary, and they won in Brazil. They only won 5 races, and Red Bull won 3, but Mercedes won over half the races this season. I believe they won 12 races, Hamilton won 9, Bottas won 3. So, they dominated the season. You can't really say anything. They easily won the constructors. No complaints there from Mercedes, I would say. And I guess now the question is, what will happen to them in 2018? I would say for Hamilton, he did seem to have a couple of off races this season, particularly Monaco. Yes, I know the car struggled a bit, but he should have matched Bottas in qualifying. I think that was a poor performance by him. But of course, he won the World Championship, so you can't be too critical. Moving on to Ferrari, big improvement by them this season, I would say. They were only the 3rd best team in 2016, but this year they were leading the Drivers' Championship at least for over half the season. They were in contention in nearly every race. Okay, I know in Abu Dhabi, for example, they were off the pace, and a couple of other races too. But in general, they'd be pretty happy. But in the Asian races of Singapore, Malaysia and Japan, that's where the championship was lost for them. A lot of it was Vettel. So, of course, in Singapore, many would say that was Vettel's fault. But, Ferrari reliability wasn't great either, and sometimes their strategy wasn't too good at the same time as well, and that really cost them the championship this season. And it could have been Vettel taking his 5th championship rather than Hamilton taking his 4th. And now, Red Bull. And I would say they had a pretty similar season to the one they had in 2016, because if you look at it, they started slowly, like they did in 2016. But then towards the end, they picked up the pace a bit. Okay, I know this year Ricciardo did win Azerbaijan, which is very much in the first half of the season, but let's be honest, that was a bit of like you could almost call that a wild card race. It was pretty crazy. And on a normal day, he wouldn't have won that race, that's for sure. And then okay, the team, particularly Verstappen, won in Malaysia and in Mexico. So they were much better towards the end of the season. But for 2018, they're going to have to come out the blocks much faster. Now, Force India, one of the most consistent teams, I would say. I think Esteban Ocon had a fantastic first full season in Formula 1. Of course, he did have half a season last year with the Mano Racing team, but this is his first time in a properly competitive car, and I thought he did pretty well. I believe Perez beat him in the Drivers' Championship, but only just by 13 points, but it's not so big. But in the one issue, I would say, in the Force India team, there were plenty of crashes, particularly between the two drivers. Of course, you saw it happening in Canada, Azerbaijan and Belgium, and that is not on. But on the other hand, they comfortably got P4. They were never going to get any higher than P4 considering their clear lack of funding, but they weren't even being challenged by the guys at Williams and Renault, so they'll be very happy over this season, although they'll be hoping next year their drivers calm down just a bit. 5th place, of course, was Williams, and they will be fairly happy with the season. Some would say they would have fallen back a bit, but they were able to essentially hold position. It would have been nice if they'd been able to challenge Force India again for P4, but it just wasn't quite to be for them this season, sadly. And they'll be fairly happy. Of course, Lance Stroll did have a slow start to the season, but he is a rookie driver, and by the end of the season I thought he was pretty good. Of course, he had that great result in Baku. As I said, that sort of became a bit of a wildcard race. And then, of course, you had brilliant qualifying at Monza. So, he's had a good season, while Massa was pretty consistent, finished, I believe, in the top 10 in the drivers, so pretty decent for him. And Williams, though, might be a bit worried about next season, especially if Renault and McLaren are able to develop their cars. Williams may have an almighty and impossible battle next season, and they're going to have to improve their car a lot if they're going to hold on. Now let's talk about Renault. So I would say they will be slightly disappointed with the season. They aimed for P5 in the Constructors. They only got P6. They missed out by roughly 30 points. And there's one reason for this. One person causes this. Jolyon Palmer. That is why they didn't get P5. If they had Carlos Sainz or another quality driver partnering Nico Rosberg from the start of the season, I reckon they would have been in P5 come the end of the season in the Constructors. But Jolyon Palmer just wasn't good enough. I think everyone watching this would agree. I don't think anyone can argue that Palmer was good enough. And yeah, it just wasn't to be for Renault. But they'll be very optimistic going into next season, and they'll be hoping maybe to even try to challenge Force India and maybe McLaren as well for P4 in the Constructors. That would be their aim next season, and I reckon they could be able to do it. Moving on now to Toro Rosso, and they've had a very up and down season. Of course, it's been a bit volatile in terms of drivers, because of course they were hit by Carlos Sainz, leaving them following the Japanese Grand Prix to go to Renault, and that meant they had inexperienced drivers in the ranks. Of course, Kvyat also wasn't good enough, and I reckon if they had a better driver they could have finished in P6 in the Constructors, because they only missed out on that by a few points as well. And then at the end they had Brendon Hartley and Pierre Gasly for the last few races of the season, and I'm sure they are good drivers, and I'm hoping for them in 2018 they'll have a better season. But they're not good enough at the straight away to get points, and that's really hurt Toro Rosso, because they were comfortably in P6 before this, and it has really hurt them. And then they'll be worried next season they're going to have the Honda power unit, and who knows, they may again give them issues. But then again, the Renault power unit in the last few races especially hasn't been very good in terms of reliability, so it can't really get much worse. Now the Haas team, and I would say Roman Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen, two of the most inconsistent drivers in the pack, because we had Magnussen getting into trouble with lots of other drivers. So for example, you had a big incident with Hülkenberg at Hungary, and in general a lot of the drivers just weren't keen on Magnussen this year. Very aggressive, and there were lots of spinning and Grosjean crashed lots in practice, and it's just not good for the team. And that's really hurt Haas, and I'm worried for them for next season. The same drivers, I can't see them making any progress, and to be honest, they cannot in any way say that this season was a success. Now to McLaren Honda, and this is where I have to admit something pretty embarrassing. So before the start of the season, I did a series of videos predicting how every team will do, and this was before testing, by the way. And I predicted that McLaren Honda will be able to get onto the podium at points this season. I would say, and I said this because in 2016 they made an improvement in comparison to 2015, but this year they went back to being really shit. And yeah, my prediction is pretty embarrassing, considering they only came P9 in the constructors. And they won't be too happy. But on the bright side, they've held on to Alonso for at least another season, and they'll be pretty happy. Van Dorn had a decent first season, only finishing a few points behind Alonso in the drivers. And there's reason to be optimistic. They have had some good races. Their chassis seems pretty good, and with the Renault engine next year, maybe they'll be able to fight for some race wins or at least some podiums. So reasons to be optimistic. And then finally, Sauber. I think they can't really complain this season. They knew they were going to be last. I think everybody knew that. I would say Verline's had a decent season, getting to get 5 points for the team, but Ericsson has been a bit poor. I don't see why he should continue in F1, apart from the money that, of course, the team gained from having him at the team. And that's the only reason for him to stay, I would argue. And there's lots of rumours about what's going to happen there next season. So yes, that's the end of the video. Before I finish the video, I just want to go over the final standings. So yeah, let's start with the drivers. So Lewis Hamilton, as I said, won the World Championship, his 4th World Champion. He won 9 races this season and accumulated 363 points. Sebastian Vettel was 2nd in the Ferrari. He won 5 races and he got 317 points. Bottas in the Mercedes won 3 races and got 305 points. And by the way, this is the first time in the V6 era where the Mercedes drivers haven't split in the championship. Promising start when we think about next season, maybe. P4, Kimi Räikkönen, 205 points. Poor season by him, I would say. Daniel Ricciardo, who won 1 race, of course in Azerbaijan, got 200 points. P6, Max Verstappen, who won 2 races, got 168 points. He was really let down by reliability, especially in the first half of the season. P7, best of the rest, Sergio Perez, 100 points. P8, Ocon, good season by him, 87 points. P9, Carlos Sainz, 54 points. Of course, using 2 different teams this season. P10, Nico Rosberg, Renault, 43 points. Felipe Massa in his final season didn't quite finish the season in the top 10, but only it was 11 points for Hulkenberg, so also 43 points. Lance Stroll, P12, 40 points. Decent first season by him. Roman Grosjean, P13, 28 points. And then Kevin Magnussen, P14, 19 points. I'd say it has been a poor season for the Haas team. P15, Fernando Alonso, 17 points. His driving has been as good as ever, but it just wasn't to be for this team. P16, Stoffel Van Dorn, 13 points. P17, Jolyon Palmer, 8 points. I've talked about him already. P18, Pascal Wehrlein, 5 points. P19, Kvyat, also 5 points. And then you had Ericsson, Gasly, Giovinazzi, Brendon Hartley, Jenson Button, and Paul di Resta all on 0 points. So yeah, that's the Drivers' Championship. 25 drivers took part this year, even though there were only 10 teams. But of course you had other drivers coming in at certain points. And then the Constructors. Mercedes won the Constructors pretty easily with 668 points, with Ferrari in second, 522 points. I think with Ferrari it's very much a question of what could have been. Red Bull had 368 points, Force India in P4, 187, strong season there. P5 was Williams, 83 points, P6 Renault, 57 points, P7 Toro Rosso 53 points, P8 Haas F1 47 points, P9 McLaren 30 points, and P10 Sauber 5 points. So yes guys, before I end this video, I want to do a video where I sort of give awards based on what you guys have been saying. So tell me, what was your favourite race, favourite moment, who would you say is the best driver, but you can't say Hamilton because he won the championship, so that would be too easy to say. Best team, best team radio, funniest moment of the season, and worst driver of the season. So yeah, I'll see you guys next time.